This week begins the world famous Olympic Games. And by that, I'm not talking about in Paris, I'm talking about right here at Gulf Coast, the Gulf Coast Olympics. That begins this week, and already a ton of work has gone in to the Gulf Coast Olympics, which begin a week from tonight. VBS for all ages, all children, adults, teenagers, good classes for everybody. Going to be a lot of fun, a lot going to be going on. So over these last 2 weeks and the next couple of weeks, I am going to follow our theme and talk a little bit about champions for God. But as I did last week, first I want to begin with a little, maybe just a little bit of Olympic trivia, okay? Let's see how you do. The Olympic motto, Citius Altius Fortius, means, how many think winning lasts forever? Raise your hand. How many think faster, higher, stronger? Raise your hand. All right, well, we'll shut that question down. I think most everybody got that one. That is B. Number 2, which athlete set a record for gold medals at a single Summer Olympics in 2008? How many think Carl Lewis? How many think Usain Bolt? How many think Michael Phelps? All right, well, we'll shut that one down too. Michael Phelps got eight, and won Olympics, and he also holds the record for most Olympic medals ever with 23. Whoa, how did that happen? Which city hosted the most recent Summer Olympics in 2021? So which city was last? How many say Rio de Janeiro? Some of you people are looking around to see what the smart ones are saying. How many say Los Angeles? How many say Beijing? How many say Tokyo? Tokyo is the correct answer. Tokyo is the correct answer. So we fooled some with Beijing there. And finally, which athlete won 4 gold medals in track and field at the 1936 Olympics? How many say Jesse Owens? How many say Carl Lewis? He wasn't born yet. How many say Jim Thorpe? How many say Michael Carter? See anybody say Michael Carter? Because I just made that name up. I just completely made it up. Just came out of nowhere. Jesse Owens, and I'll have more to say about that a little later. The Olympics feature champions for gold, but the Bible features champions for God. I'd rather be a champion for God than a champion for gold, I'll tell you what. Some of them are so famous, some of the champions for God. Everybody knows them by name. David, and Daniel in the lion's den, and Moses parting the Red Sea, and Elijah on Mount Carmel. But hidden between the pages of these major characters, there are some interesting, often unnoticed, unappreciated champions for God. And last week we met one of them, Benaiah, a man who boldly followed a lion into a pit on a snowy day. Who would do such a thing? Benaiah did. And today we're going to meet a new one, and his name is Micaiah. And I would think probably half or more of the room has never heard of Micaiah. You will know all about Micaiah by the time we leave today. Micaiah, we might call the prophet with a bloody nose. And he's going to teach us what any champion for God, including you and me, have to know. And that is, sometimes you have to stand out in courage and stand up for God alone. Let me give you the background for this story before we begin. It's about 900 years before the time of Christ. The United Kingdom, as we studied last year in Love Your Bible, the United Kingdom that had been united under David and Solomon has now split into the northern and southern kingdom. The northern kingdom's king is Ahab. He's wicked as all get out. And the southern kingdom is led by Jehoshaphat, and he's an okay king. The northern king, Ahab, was a wicked man married to an even more wicked woman. Her name was, I think I heard Jessica, but it's Jezebel. Her name was Jezebel. And he he was a greedy man, and next door to him, a man named Naboth had had a vineyard in his family for generations. And Ahab wanted that vineyard that was attached to his palace land. And he made several offers to get it, and Naboth wouldn't sell it. And so he started to pout. And one night he didn't even eat dinner. And he, after not eating dinner, his wife Jezebel said, "What's wrong with you?" And he said, "I want this plot of land. I want this vineyard. It would fit in well with my palace." And then he just stomped off to bed. And Jezebel followed him in and said, "I'll get that for you. I know how to get it for you." And they plotted to have Naboth killed. And he was. And Ahab took over his property. And God in heaven said, "Nope." And he sent a prophet Elijah to go stick a finger in Ahab's face and say, "You are going to die, and you are going to die the same exact way Naboth did. Just as the dogs licked his blood, they're going to lick your blood, and not only you, but that of your wicked wife, Jezebel." 3 years passed. Nothing happened. Ahab probably thought the prophecy would never come true. Ahab decided that he wanted to attack the Syrians to the east of him, but he didn't think he could do it on his own. So he needed some help. So he approached Jehoshaphat, the king of the southern kingdom, and said, "We could go in together and we can take this land and territory from the Syrians." And Jehoshaphat wisely said, "Well, have you asked your prophets? Have you inquired of God about whether this is a move we should make?" And Ahab said, "Oh yes, I've asked 400 of them. And all 400 of them have said, 'Sure, go ahead. You can do this.'" Well, Jehoshaphat knew they were all yes men. He knew they would all say whatever Ahab told them to say. So he said, "Is there anybody else you could ask?" He said, "Well, there's this one prophet. His name is Micaiah, but I don't want to talk to him because he just hates me. He always prophesies bad things about me, so I really don't want to have to ask him." Jehoshaphat insisted. And so Ahab sent for Micaiah, and when he was brought in, Ahab said, "Micaiah, should we go into battle?" And this is where we'll pick up in the text. "Micaiah, should we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or should we hold back?" And Micaiah replied sarcastically, "Sure, go up and be victorious, for the Lord will give the king victory." And the king knew, of course, he was being sarcastic, and he replied sharply, "How many times must I demand that you speak only the truth to me when you're speaking for the Lord?" And Micaiah told him, "In a vision, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, 'Their master,'" which would be Ahab, "has been killed. Send them home in peace." "Didn't I tell you," the king of Israel exclaimed to Jehoshaphat, "he never prophesies anything but trouble for me?" Micaiah went on to describe the destruction that would occur if they went into Syria. 400 prophets again said, "No, Micaiah's wrong, that won't happen." So we pick up in verse 23. "So you see, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouths of all your prophets, for the Lord has pronounced your doom." Then Zedekiah walked up to Micaiah and slapped him across the face. "Since when did the Spirit of the Lord leave me to speak to you?" he demanded. And Micaiah replied, "You will find out soon enough when you are trying to hide in some secret room." "Arrest him," Ahab ordered. "Take him back to Ammon, the governor of the city, and to my son Joash. Give them this order from the king. Put this man in prison and feed him nothing but bread and water until I return safely from the battle." But Micaiah replied, "If you return safely, it will mean the Lord has not spoken through me. And then he said to everyone standing around, everybody mark my words. Here you got it set up, don't you? One of them's going to be right, one of them's going to be wrong. If Ahab returns home, Micaiah is a false prophet and hasn't heard from the Lord. But Ahab was scared enough, believed him enough to disguise himself as an ordinary soldier rather than dressing like a king. See, in those days, the king, dressed like a king, led until they got up to the point of battle, so all the soldiers would see the king in front, he's our leader, and then he would scoot to the side and they would march into battle. Not Ahab. He dressed as an ordinary soldier, put himself in the middle of the army, hoping he wouldn't be targeted. And in the middle of the battle, a Syrian archer shot one arrow toward the army of Israel without even aiming. And that random arrow flew straight through Ahab and pierced the chink in his armor. And he realized he was bleeding. And he said to his chariot driver, "Take me back, I'm wounded." And he died in the chariot thinking about Micaiah's prophecy. They buried him near the palace, and the Bible makes a point of specifically saying that dogs from Samaria came and licked his blood from the chariot, exactly as Elijah had predicted. And several years later, Jezebel was killed after she was thrown off the top of a wall, and dogs again ate her body and licked her blood, exactly as God had prophesied through Isaiah. The old Puritan preachers used to say, the wheels of God may grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly small. That means when God says something is going to happen, it may take a while, but it will happen. As the story ends, Micaiah is still in prison on a bread and water diet, but the wicked king Ahab is dead. Because Micaiah was a champion who wasn't afraid to stand alone and stand up and tell the truth. And one of the reasons that I picked him as one of our champions during this Olympic series in Vacation Bible School weeks is because what he did is exactly what many of us who are true Bible-believing Christians must do in this culture today. We must stand for truth against those who oppose truth. We must stand for God against those who say there is no God. We must stand for right against those who define anything they want as right and virtually nothing as wrong. You see, a champion can go up against the crowd and speak the truth. 400 prophets were saying, go to war and you'll win. Only one had the courage to stand up and speak God's truth. And he had to go against the crowd to do that. He had to face 400 to 1 odds to do that. He faced peer pressure just like we do today. You see, we often talk about peer pressure when we're only talking about this group right here. But peer pressure begins when you're a child, and then it moves to your adolescent years, and then your adult years, and it never leaves you. We want to be liked by other people, so we tend to go along to get along. The first reality television show actually was in the 60s. It was Candid Camera. How many of you remember Candid Camera or some part of it? It was hilarious. And many of the Candid Camera episodes became case studies for sociologists researching peer pressure. For instance, in one episode, several actors were already on an elevator when an unsuspecting person stepped in. And the actors were all facing the back of the elevator, rather than the front where the buttons were. And in over 90% of the cases, the unsuspecting person eventually faced the back of the elevator also. You don't believe me?
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before.
Yeah, this happened with almost everybody. Almost everybody. In another episode, and I didn't feel like I should show you this one. I really didn't. Actors were sitting in a doctor's office, outer waiting room, wearing only their underwear, their bottoms. Over half the unsuspecting people who came in sat down for a minute, saw everybody down to their underwear, and then stood up and disrobed and were waiting to be called back to the examining room. I mean, this peer pressure thing is a big deal. How easy would it have been for Micaiah to just walk up and say, gosh, there's 400 on one side and one on the other, except he had heard from God, really heard from God, not like them. As Christians, we're called to be like Micaiah. We're called to be different from the crowd. We are not of this world, so we should never seek to be like the world. We're commanded to always speak the truth in love. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. That's a tremendous balance. Truth and love. Each without the other is incomplete. Some people speak the truth, but they use it as a hammer to hurt others. There's no love there. On the other extreme, some people are so loving that they never tell the truth about someone's dangerously sinful behavior. They just put up with it, assuming that it's the loving thing to do. That's not love. That's sentimentality. If you're going to base your morality on the Bible, you may be like Micaiah, the only one in 400 sometimes at work, at school, in your community, who says, this is right, this is wrong, here I stand. A champion needs a team. But he can stand alone if it's necessary. It may be painful, but he can stand alone as long as he is standing on the side of God's truth. And we don't have to make up truth. We only need to stand on God's truth. What is truth? Well, Jesus said, your word is truth. And just before that, Jesus had said to his disciples, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Let me ask you 2 personal questions. Like Micaiah, are you willing to stand up and speak God's truth in love? And the second question is, are you willing to stand on God's truth even if you are the only one standing? And if you can answer yes to both of those questions, then you should carefully consider this next thought. A champion who can answer yes to both of those questions, stand up to the truth, better expect to be attacked. Better expect to be attacked. We've all heard the expression, the truth hurts, but it's also true that sometimes when you speak the truth, you get hurt. Micaiah got a bloody nose and prison time for speaking the truth. Don't be surprised when you are attacked for standing up for truth. Jesus said it would happen. He said, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you are no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. Expect that. Don't expect a godless, unbelieving world to like you and agree with you. Not gonna happen. The earliest reformer of all in religion found that out. Martin Luther was a German Catholic monk who started reading the Bible for himself and comparing it to the practices of the Roman Catholic Church, such as the selling of indulgences. And if you want to know what the selling of indulgences were, I've got a long section on this in Gulf Coast Church School in the last lessons. But if you want to know basically what it was a get-out-of-hell free card for large donors. That's what it was. You could send whatever you wanted to, and you get a get-out-of-hell free card from the priest if you made large contributions. And that was just one of many things that ticked Luther off. So in 1517, he hammered a paper listing 95 problems that he had with Catholic doctrine to the castle church door in Wittenberg. And he dared to challenge the Pope and claimed that the Bible and the Bible alone is God's final authority. In 1521, they put him on trial in Worms. And Emperor Charles V presided over it. And they said he was guilty of heresy. And he was declared an outlaw. And German citizens were forbidden to give him any shelter or give him any food. And anyone could kill him without penalty. So he had an open target on him. But friends rescued him and hid him in the Wartburg Castle for a year, where in privacy he translated the entire New Testament into German. But what he famously said at Worms is, unless I am convinced by proofs from scriptures or by plain and clear reasons and arguments, I can and will not retract. For it is neither safe nor wise to do anything against conscience. Here I stand, I can do no other. God help me, amen. And he stood alone against the Roman Catholic Church. And he paid the price for it as he began the Reformation movement. And before his trial, a Catholic priest had warned him, the whole world is against you. And he said, then I'm against the whole world. A champion who could stand alone. Now, one last thing I want to bring to you. A champion's full reward may not come in this life. Our champion today, Micaiah, didn't receive an immediate reward for speaking the truth. In fact, he landed in jail with only bread and water as his diet, and we never hear from him again. So we don't know if he died in prison or if he was ultimately released. We do know this: Ahab's son became the next king, and the Bible says he was as bad, if not worse, than Ahab and provoked the Lord to anger. just as his father did. So I imagine he didn't like Micaiah any better than his father did. But the lesson we learn is that God's champions do not always have to receive or will not always receive a reward in this life. When we stand up for truth and stand alone and stand strong, our reward will definitely come for eternity in the next life. Actually, I think Micaiah is mentioned again in the Bible, just not by name. For in Hebrews chapter 11, we find a great roll call of faith. It's often been called the Hall of Fame of Faith. And all the well-known champions for God are mentioned by name. Abraham and Joseph and Moses and Samson and David are mentioned. And then in the latter part of that chapter, we read a summary statement about the lesser-known champions. And it doesn't name them, but it tells us what they did. And I believe Micaiah was in mind of the Hebrew writer when he wrote these words. Women received their loved ones back from the dead. There were those who under torture refused to give in and go free. That could have been him. Preferring something better, resurrection. Others braved abuse and whips and yes, chains and dungeons. We have stories of those who were stoned, sawed in two. That's always been the one I don't want. Murdered in cold blood. Stories of vagrants wandering the earth in animal skins, homeless, friendless, powerless. The world didn't deserve them. Making their way as best they could on the cruel edges of the world. Not one of these people, even though their lives of faith were exemplary, got their hands on what was promised because God had a better plan for us. That their faith and our faith would come together to make one completed whole, the lives of faith not complete apart from ours. That's heaven. That's eternity. I want to close with a true Olympic story about somebody standing on their own. A modern day Micaiah. In 1936, Adolf Hitler attempted to use the Berlin Olympics as a platform to promote Nazism and Aryan superiority. The Olympics were held on the verge of World War II, and the stadium were covered with red and black swastikas flying everywhere. German soldiers goose-stepped and saluted the ever-present posturing Hitler. However, by the time those Olympics were over, Jesse Owens, an African-American son of an Alabama sharecropper, had crushed Hitler's myth of racial superiority and embarrassed him before the whole world. He stood for truth, he stood alone, and he stood strong, just like Micaiah. He won 5 gold medals and humiliated Hitler through a brief but unique friendship with a Nazi poster boy, one of their greatest athletes. After a stellar track career at Ohio State, Owens arrived at the Berlin Olympics facing tremendous opposition just because of his skin color. In Germany, Nazis portrayed African Americans as inferior and ridiculed the United States for relying on what they called them black auxiliaries. One German official even criticized the United States for allowing non-humans to compete. It's into that environment that Jesse Owens marched head up, shoulders up, to compete. During the trials for the long jump, he came dangerously close to not qualifying. He failed on his first 2 jumps. If he failed on the 3rd jump, he would be out. And it was at that point that Luz Long, a tall, blue-eyed, blonde German long jumper, stepped in and introduced himself to Owens. Long was Germany's best and was actually the favorite to win the gold. and Owens was the favorite to win the silver. Long suggested that Jesse make a mark 2 or 3 inches short of the takeoff board and jump from there just to be safe and make sure he made the qualifying rounds. And Owens took his advice and easily qualified. And they became best buddies through the rest of the week. And Owens went on to win the gold medal in the long jump, and Long took the silver. And Long was the first one to embrace Owens on the stand and congratulate him on his win. In fact, there's a famous picture of Jesse Owens on the medal stand with Luke Long behind him, and it looks like he is saluting his new friend Jesse Owens as well as ignoring Adolf Hitler. Later, Owens would say, "It took an awful lot of courage for him to befriend me right in front of Hitler. You can melt down all the medals and cups I have, and they wouldn't be a plating on the 24-karat friendship that I felt for Luke Long at that moment." And then Owens said, "Hitler must have gone crazy watching us embrace." The story doesn't end there. Owens returned to America as a hero, but he still wasn't exempt from the racial discrimination in his own country. He received a ticker tape parade down the streets of New York City, and there was a reception held for him at the top of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. I've been there, many of you have as well. But in a sad, ironic twist to his story, this hero was forced to ride the freight elevator in the back of the hotel up to his own reception, honoring him. Lucrative sports deals were rare during the Depression, and so Owens struggled to have enough money to eat. He resorted to participating in events like racing against horses and dogs, and some people said that's humiliating and dehumanizing him. And he said, well, it may be dehumanizing and degrading for an Olympic champion to run against a horse or a dog, but what was I supposed to do? I have 5 gold medals, but you can't eat gold medals. It wasn't until the 1950s that he attained some degree of financial security by becoming a public speaker for corporations at public relations events. And then he died, sadly, at age 66 in 1980. His success in the 1936 Olympics far surpassed the impact of simply winning a race or jumping the farthest. It was a masterful political and racial statement heard around the world 10 years after his death. In 1990, our country gave Jesse Owens a fitting reward for what he had finally accomplished. President George H.W. Bush posthumously awarded Owens the Congressional Medal of Honor and gave it to his widow. What a beautiful picture this is of the Christian life. All the medals and rewards we receive in this life are nothing compared to the one we will receive posthumously when we are in heaven. And we join all the others who have gone on before us. They're waiting for us. And their reward, we read in one of our texts there in Hebrews, won't be fully complete until we are there too. And one day, if we are a champion for God, if we stand strong for God, we'll stand before Jesus and hear the applause of the nail-scarred hands and hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." That should be motivation for us enough to stand up like Micaiah, to stand alone if necessary like Micaiah, and to make sure that even if we are attacked because we are a Christian, we keep standing.